Okay. Well, hello and welcome to the JALT International Conference 2020 ERC Forum. We are presenting the forum online this year, and we have exciting panel of speakers, and it will be my pleasure to introduce them. Now, I'm going to repeat what Mark said. And so before I introduce them, I would like to remind everyone of the two things. First, we will be recording this session. So if you do not want to have your face or space forever memorialized, please use your avatar picture for the duration of the talks and the question and answer period. But the speakers don't mind to have a great audience such as yourself. So if you feel comfortable enough to keep in vivo, please, we would love that too. Secondly, if you kindly mute yourself during the proceedings, which Mark has already done for you, it would be very much appreciated. We also ask that you keep yourself muted because the speakers have asked that we present all questions for them at the end of the final talk. So if you do have a question, as Mark said, please write it into chat, specifying who should answer the question. All right, now it is my privilege to introduce our speakers. First, we have Willie Renandya, who teaches language education courses at the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University. He has published extensively in the area of second language education. And his most recent publications include The Primacy of Extensive Reading and Listening, 2020 with Richard Day, and The Potential of Series Books, How Narrow Reading Leads to Advanced L2 Proficiency, 2019 with Stephen Krashen and George Jacobs. He is a frequent speaker at TESOL conferences. The next two speakers have paired their talk, and they are Matthew Cotter and Katrina Takeuchi. Originally from England, Katrina came to Japan in 1990 for 3 months of backpacking. She lives in Nara now and works primarily with young learners focusing on literacy and storytelling. She's a teacher, trainer, and freelance writer. Matt hails from the deep south of New Zealand, but has been living in Sapporo, the very north of Japan, for 20 years. His passion is rugby and snowboarding, but he finds time to lecture at Hokusei Gakuen University Junior College on intercultural communication, sports theory, and Ainu and Maori studies. The next pair is Ms. Shamsi Ara Huda, an alumni of the University of Dhaka, who is an assistant professor in the Department of English at Daffodil International University, Bangladesh. She is an executive committee member of the Bangladesh English Language Teachers Association, BELTA. She is one of the developers of the English language learning app Brimmeng, that is BRIMMENG, available in Google Play Store. Being a TEA Fellow of the US Department of State, she has represented Bangladesh in a number of international forums, including TESOL international conventions. She writes for the reading project, Stories About Ourselves. And her partner, Sherry Brown, assistant professor at Akita International University, which is an English medium university in northern Japan, in the EAP and BE programs. She currently teaches academic reading across discipline courses. She is a longtime member of the THT-SIG. She is also project coordinator for the Stories About Ourselves project, providing free online reading resources to Bangladesh EFL teachers and learners with a kind sponsorship of BELTA. All right, well then, without any further ado, let's now turn to our speakers. Willie, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our session this afternoon. My topic is pretty straightforward. It's about the reading and writing connection. I think we all know that reading and writing are connected. But today, my focus will be on how we can strengthen the connection, the link between reading and writing. So that is one of the takeaways today. The other one is how we can use reading as a springboard to developing writing. So these are the two things that I want to get across and I want to share with you. And hopefully we can learn one or two things after my presentation. Let's get started. The 4 skills: reading, listening, speaking, and writing. Sherry, if you could have your audio on, you could, probably respond to some of our questions here. All of the 4 skills are challenging for our students. Is that a yes or a no, Sherry?
All of the skills are challenging for our students.
Yes, they are all challenging, right? Yes.
Yes.
And productive skills are usually more challenging than receptive skills. Yeah, you are in agreement with that? Okay. Now the last one is this: what is the most difficult skill for our students across the board? In particular, those who have achieved some level of proficiency, what one skill that continues to be difficult, to be challenging for our students? Please say writing.
Writing.
Good. Yes, writing.
Thank you for your help with that.
Okay, if you look at a graph like this, I'm sure you're very familiar with this kind of graph. I look at the application documents of students, graduate students who want to study with, in my university, and I often see a very, very typical IELTS score here. Now, each graph represents one skill. What are these skills usually? Sherry again. I think Sherry is very good at responding to my questions. What are the...
Writing must be one of the most...
Exactly, yes. Writing is the last one. And what are the 2 skills that students are usually quite good at, especially in terms of the IELTS skill, IELTS test?
Oh, speaking?
Yes, speaking comes a bit later, actually. This is what it looks like usually.
Okay.
Now, I've seen this again and again and again. Listening and reading are good, speaking slightly below, but writing tends to be, the lowest in terms of students' capability. Now, the question then is this. I think we all know about this, that writing is difficult for you, writing is difficult for me, writing is difficult for L2 students, and even for native speakers. Now, these are probably some of the problems related to writing, and I'm sure you'll agree with me. Unlike speaking, writing is context independent. The speaker, the person you're writing to, is not in front of you. And that makes things really hard because you have to say almost everything. You can't really stop and ask the person, hey, do you understand what I'm writing here? You can't. So that makes writing really challenging. Number 2, in terms of the structure and organization, writing is also very demanding. You can't really, deviate very much from the standard, the conventional way of doing a piece of writing, in particular academic writing. You need to use a lot of text signals. Otherwise, you will find that your readers will not be able to follow your train of thoughts very well. So text signals like, however, first I want to do this, second, third, in conclusion, these are things that you have to add, to say in your essay. Another thing that makes writing difficult is this: we need to use the rather formal and standard variety of the language that we're using. For example, the word look at is very common in conversation, but in especially academic writing, people tend to use the word examine, explore, investigate, and things like that. Put up with, for example, is very common in social interaction, but in writing, you might probably want to use tolerate. Other sources of difficulty: writing usually requires the use of longer sentences and more complicated grammatical structures as well. And that makes writing, again, difficult. For academic writing in particular, the demand is even higher because you need to know the content very well, and you need to know how to organize the content in such a way that the whole thing is coherent, is easy to understand. And finally, I think you will agree with me, writing generally, academic writing in particular, is slow, is painful, is laborious, and mentally taxing. The good news, now here is something that I want to share with you. The good news is this. The good news is that reading is related to writing. Reading can lead to writing. I think that is something that I've learned over the years, something that I've learned from reading in the professional literature about the connection between reading and writing. And we can use reading as a springboard to developing students' writing skills. Now let's examine, or let's look at. Did I use look at or examine? Okay, both. Let's look at the connections between reading and writing. We know that they're closely related. We know also that if students can't read, they can't write as well. I think that is a fact. Number two, the next one is good writers are usually good readers. What do you think, Sherry? Good writers are usually good readers.
Yes, I would say so.
I would agree. Yes, I would agree about that too. The next question is for Greg, my friend from Hawaii. Greg, good readers are good writers? Greg, are you there? Good readers are also good writers?
I would agree with Sherry that all good writers are good readers, but not all good readers are good writers.
Exactly, yes, exactly. Now, this is interesting. Whenever I give a workshop on extensive reading, whenever I say that extensive reading can lead to improvement in writing, there's usually one or two teachers who say, no, 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 I have a case. I have an example of a student who read a lot, but the writing is not very good. Yeah. So yes, I agree. Usually good readers are good writers, but not always. I think that's the thing. So that is the gap, actually. And that is the gap that we need to address. If we are very much into reading, into extensive reading, there is something that we need to also pay attention to. We need to focus on, because reading does not always lead to good writing. So they are similar. Reading and writing are similar, but they are not the same. Now, this is a quote. This is some of the reasons why they are related, but they're not the same. Reading involves a lot of comprehension processes. In other words, what we do in our head is known as semantic processing. We try to understand, we try to comprehend things. It's not a bad thing. Actually, it's a good thing. But producing, speaking, writing, they require a different kind of processing. This is known as syntactic processing. We need to translate ideas, meaning, into words, into phrases, into sentences that are grammatically acceptable, that are textually also comprehensible. So that extra thing which makes reading does not always lead to writing. In other words, receptive knowledge is good, but it does not always automatically translate to productive knowledge. So they're similar but not identical. Here is a quote just to provide a support for what I just shared with you from Fitzgerald and Shanahan. They've been doing a lot of stuff on reading, on writing, and the relationship between the two. And after years and years of research, they come to this conclusion. If reading and writing really were identical, not just similar, then everything learned in one would automatically transfer to the other. And we know that that is not the case. Similar, but not identical. Now, this is where we need to now explore different models for dealing with, for teaching writing. What I have here is two different models. The first one is known as a direct model, that reading automatically translates to writing. That's called a direct model. And the other one is the indirect model. The indirect model requires that we need to do something. Teachers need to help our students to see the connection, to help the students make use of what they have read and translate this into writing. The first one, the direct model, is represented by Stephen Krashen, essentially. Now, this is what he says. When enough reading is done, all the necessary grammatical structures and discourse rules for writing will automatically be presented to the writer in sufficient quantity. And Krashen would probably say that is more than enough. If you read a great deal, you'll be able to write as well. One thing that we need to remember when Krashen says enough, that is enough in terms of quantity, in terms of the amount of reading. Usually our students do not have the quantity, and also the quality of reading. Quality here refers to the different varieties of texts, of genres that the students are exposed to. So these two will have to be in place if you want to adopt the direct model. Researchers like Krashen would agree that the direct model is the way to go, and that's enough. But people like us who have been working, on the ground, so to speak, dealing with the students of all sorts, would probably say that the direct model is good, but it's not enough. I think we need to do something. We need to add something to it. And that is when we need to consider a number of models. And this is Willie's indirect model, adopted from many different sources. So if you want to help your students see the link more clearly between reading and writing, then you need to consider at least 4 different aspects. The first one is we need to have a strong theory of language. Number 2, we also need to find a good theory of language learning. And this too is not enough because we also need to consider the teacher and the student. So these are the 4 things that I want to get across here to you in the next 5 or 10 minutes. Greg, give me 10 minutes. Okay, theory of language. I think we are familiar with the structural model of language, all about words, about phrases, about sentence structures and things like that. The other model, the functional model, I think is now the most popular and the more widely adopted model in language education. One example of the functional model of language is known as the genre model. The idea that the text is meaningful, the idea that a piece of writing is always written in relation to a specific audience in mind, and the context is also very, very clear, whether it's informal context, formal context, academic context, and things like that. So there are 3 major things that we need to consider when we adopt a functional model of the language. And later we will see how this model, pans out in our discussion. So in terms of the theory of language, we need to adopt this model or other similar models, but we need to consider the purpose, the audience, and the context of the situation. In terms of the theory of language, I would probably stick to these 2 theories. There may be other theories out there, but these 2 are probably the most relevant. The first one is the input theory. This is where the extensive reading idea and extensive listening idea are based upon. The input theory, the idea that comprehension is good, the idea then that a large quantity of language through reading and through listening are a nice way of helping students improve on their English language proficiency. Number 2, I think research also tells us that input alone is not enough. We need to add something to it. This is where the noticing hypothesis by Dick Schmidt comes into the picture. Yeah, so we are going later to see how these 2 theories will be, will be used to describe the model. The teacher. Now, this is the most important part. In the indirect model, the teacher plays, an important role in helping students to develop their writing proficiency through reading. So in terms of the teacher, we need an approach that connects reading, writing, and noticing. And here is a model that I think can accommodate not only the theory of language, but also the theory of language learning. I think many of you are familiar with this model. It's known as the genre-based model for teaching writing, basically, which begins with modeling, deconstructing, joint construction, independent construction, and focus feedback. So I'm going to go through this very, very quickly now. Modeling. Modeling is what we teach. Modeling is the initial stage of teaching writing. Modeling is preparing our students for the job that they will need to be doing later. First point to remember is this: simple ideation activity like brainstorming for ideas and everything, that is good, but that is not enough. I think our students need to see this. They need to see a lot of ideas. They need to see how these ideas are represented in language forms. The words that are used to express those ideas, the grammatical features, the text features, and things like that. This is where the input theory comes in. At this stage, I think the students will need to be presented with a large number of model texts. And the model text here can come in the form of reading text or listening text. I would use both. Sample or model text to help the students see that, hey, this is what it looks like. This is what me, the teacher, want you to be able to produce in your own writing. And I'm going to show you all these models for you to appreciate, for you to understand, and things like that. The modeling thing is very important. And I want to share with you a quote here from a book. Now, this book is not very popular among academics. Then it's not, but it's very popular with real people out there who wants to really learn how to write. Very interesting stuff. Look at this. The language is non-technical, but this is exactly the kind of process that a lot of people go through. Writing is learned by imitation. If anyone asks me how I learned to write, I would say I learned by reading the men and women who were doing the kind of writing I wanted to do and trying to figure out how they did it. If I want to write like Mark Helgeson, for example, I would download every single piece of research that he has done, and I will read it again and again until all the language features and language patterns and his style of writing, stick in my head. At least that would be the initial thing. But later on, I may make changes and develop my own style of writing. But the first thing will be imitation, or creative imitation, if you like. The second part is deconstructing. Again, this is part of the teaching that we do. Giving a model is not enough. This is the part where focus noticing, this is the noticing hypothesis again. The teacher's job here is to highlight important features of a specific text type that you want your students to be able to do at the end. For example, here's a narrative which has been broken down, deconstructed basically into different components. But of course, you don't want the students to pay attention to every single thing. That would not make a lot of sense for the students. Highlight the important things. Maybe this week, focus on the text structure, the way the text, a narrative is organized, orientation, complication, resolution, and coda. And then the following week, you want to focus on some of the important language features like the tenses or the word phrases that are typically found in a narrative text like this. Okay, so the key word here is focused noticing. The next part is quite straightforward. The students are almost ready, but they're not ready yet. Now, this is where the joint construction comes into the picture. The student and the teacher jointly producing a piece of writing. The idea of writing with the teacher, writing with a lot of support from the teacher. An example of this, there are many other examples. Provide a frame like this. Provide a list of vocabulary words that the students may need to use in their writing. So this is the joint construction bit. Yeah. Once you're happy that the students are okay, more or less okay, then the next bit is, I think this is a part that you are all very familiar with, the process writing bit. Planning, drafting, revising, editing, submitting. I think you know about this. Yeah. Okay. The last bit is focus feedback. Again, the key word here is focus, focus, focus. You can't really correct everything that the students have written. I think we are familiar with this idea that, when we give feedback, we can do it extensively, meaning we can correct almost everything that the students have produced, or we can choose to do a more selective, targeted, focused feedback. I would go with the second one. The third one, if you are tired, after a long semester, then small feedback or minimal feedback or no feedback. I mean, that is okay too. Yeah, but generally focus targeted feedback. The research again is very clear. If you do this, chances are your students will pay attention, your students will do something about it. Just some tips just to help us remember when we give focus feedback, 3 things to remember. Number 1, our feedback will have to be positive. Number 2, specific. And number 3, clear. Keep this in mind. Anything that is positive is likely to be remembered by the students. Anything that is negative will be mostly ignored by our students. So this is the model that I just presented. Yeah, there's a modeling, deconstruction, joint construction, independent construction, and focus feedback. This is how we can possibly help our students to connect, to see the connection more closely between reading and writing. Students' role, the teacher's role is very clear. The student's role now, they simply have to continue doing this, read more and write more. There's no other way. People say, Sherry, that practice makes perfect. Yes.
Perfect.
That is really not accurate, actually. It has to be perfect. Yes. Thank you, Greg. Perfect practice that makes perfect. Just practice, 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 writing does not lead to any improvement. I don't believe that is the case. It has to be supervised practice by the teacher, helping the students along the way, giving the students enough language input, and also highlighting to the students the kind of things that they need to pay attention to. Also ask the students to be engaged in what is known as writerly reading. You read a piece of text as if you will be writing something similar in the future. Now, it has been nicely termed as writerly reading. The students will also be doing readerly writing as well. That is interesting because audience is very important, right? So unless we point out to the students, hey, students, when you write, do not submit your work right away. Chances are your first draft is horrible because the first draft is only about you, your perspective, your point of view. Engage students in what is known as readerly writing. Pay attention to who your audience is and pay attention to the kind of things that you need to do to help your students to help your readers to be able to follow your text nicely. So read like a writer and write like a reader. Think about this. I think after a while, this whole things will make a lot of sense to you because that is what we go through as a reader and as a writer ourselves. So these are really indirect model basically for making the connection closer, stronger between reading and writing. We need a theory of language. We need a theory of language learning. We need to ensure that the teacher adopts an approach, a method that connects the two. And we also promote students writing through frequent and supervised practice. Conclusion, 2 minutes, 1 minute. So I have shared with you some ways of helping us and students see the connection between reading and writing, strengthen the connection further. And in order to do that, we need some basis. We need a theory of language. We need a theory of language learning. We need to empower the teacher and also the students. And I really hope that the students will be able to eventually be able to produce a decent piece of writing. Pedagogical implication, very clear.
Of course.
It makes sense to separate them artificially because they are so related. Sorry. In other words, a reading teacher should.
I'm sorry, Willie, could you repeat that last 30 seconds? We had a glitch there.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I think so. Yes. I think pedagogically, I think we need to consider integrating reading and writing. Do not teach them separately, but teach them together. And that means a reading teacher should also be a writing teacher. And if that happens, your school, your university may double your salary because you are doing 2 jobs now instead of just 1. You're a reading teacher and you are also a writing teacher. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, you've been a great audience. Here is a free gift for you. All these wonderful books are available in my website, including the first one is about what I just presented, bridging the reading writing connection in second language learning. And there are many other resources available on in my website, Willie's ELT Corner, all free for viewing and download if you do that before the end of today. Greg, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Willie. That was wonderful. And I was really glad to hear your ideas about writing. Thank you. Excellent. All right. Wonderful. Well, let's now turn to Matthew and Katrina. They have a wonderful talk for us too. And I don't know who wants to go first. Matt, do you want to go first, or Katrina, are you first?
Can you give the host to Matt, please?
Mark, can you give the host to Matt, please?
Yeah, can Matt share the screen, please?
I've got it. I'm just trying to share the screen. It's spinning a bit. My Wi-Fi is not the best, I think.
Okay, and Matt, when you're ready, I'll start the timer and I'll give you a 2-minute warning by giving you a peace sign. Okay.
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 I don't know what's happening here, but can anyone see my screen yet?
Not yet. No, we cannot.
Oh, let me. Oh, there we go. Maybe. Can you see it now?
No, we cannot.
So it looks like it's on the way, but we still see black.
Yeah.
Might be my Wi-Fi possibly. I don't know why. And these things spinning around. But the beach ball spinning. But,
Uh-oh. The danger ball.
okay, let me see if this works. You can see it now?
No, we cannot.
Oh, it's got the little green thing around.
We see something. Now you should expand that at full screen, please.
I'm trying to play it from start, but she's spinning.
Matt, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh,
Can you hear
good. It faded out of just a bit.
Oh, what's happening?
Matt, try switching off your video of yourself.
Okay. That might be a good idea.
We could switch you on later when you start speaking.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, but you should maximize it.
How are we going now?
Perfect.
Okay.
That looks wonderful.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
All right. I'll start the timer now, if you don't mind.
Okay, here we go. Welcome one, welcome all to the inaugural episode of ER, the podcast. Today, we'll be accessing global issues through intertwining narratives. I'm your host, Trina Chalmers Takeuchi, and I'm coming to you live from Nara, home of the deer and a freakishly large Buddha. Today, to help us in our studio up in Hokkaido, we have Mr. Matthew Cotter. Please put on your big listening ears for Matt Cotter. Hello, Matt.
Hi. Thank you, everybody. Is my video working now? Okay. Yeah. Great. Well, as long as you can hear me, that's the main thing. So, Trina, it was yours and Anne's idea to write this series about the global issues-based narratives. Can you tell us a little bit more about the idea and the process that bringing these greater readers to life?
Sure. Well, if we take the process first, a picture paints 1,000 words, Matt. Why don't you share that picture of you and I in a writing session in the process?
Okay, let's go to the next one. Well, we are spinning. Sorry, the beach ball spinning again, but I need to recognize.
Okay, so as anybody who's ever written more than a postcard, and that's most people here, we all know that trying to create a piece of writing is like giving birth. And trying to create these stories was like giving birth to a cow, you know, like a Highland cow with big curly horns. So if we go back to how it all got started, cut a really long story short, because this goes back 5 or 6 years. It started with Anne Mider and I just having like such an interest in the topic of trafficking, particularly for sexual exploitation. We are talking about it all the time, exchanging research, exchanging videos, etc. And the more we found out, the more questions we had and the more we researched. And this went on for maybe for a couple of years, you know. We got into sort of things, we got into gonzo porn and well, I should rephrase that. We did not get into gonzo porn. We learned about gonzo porn and the impact that it has on people, men who go to trafficked women for sex, basically. At one point, we ended up in Nepal and we had the opportunity to speak with women who were survivors of sex trafficking. This woman here, Charamaya Tamang, she sat down with us. It was quite unexpected for us for maybe 4 or 5 hours and told us her incredible story. And she's since started an organization called Shakti Samahar, and they take on the Nepali government to eradicate the stigma attached to these women and to work towards better rights for women. After that, we were just like, we have to get this topic to the students. We have to get this topic into the classroom. And really, we felt like we needed to create something with all of this information that we had, that other teachers who also wanted to bring that topic into the classroom could use. So we went through lots of different ideas, workbooks, this, that, the other, tossed them all out, and we decided on a graded reader, probably because we both love reading, writing, and extensive reading. So then we had to look at what is on the market right now. Can I have the next slide, please, Matt?
Yes, let me try to get there.
Okay, so we looked at what was on the market, and there are lots of books with global issues out there, such as these, and the next slide, and the next slide. And some of these books are really, really good, but they're all non-fiction. And data collection at Conan Women's University revealed that with self-selection, the students select stories. They want to read stories and they want to read them at a lower level. So there's a gap, there was a gap in the market. No one is telling these stories, and there's lots of these stories out there. So we went to the next slide. So then we realized, okay, well, we need to write a book. Okay, but how are we going to write a book with all of this information? Because there's just so many facets to the trafficking story that we wanted to include. And we came up with this idea of a 3-strand narrative. So each of these books is an individual story, 3,000 words, written at 600 head words, sorry. Taken, Mission, Haven. And each, Anya's story is, of course, the girl who gets caught up in the trafficking. Magda's story kind of represents like the innocence, the unaware, the people who know nothing. Magda, her mother, could not conceive of an idea where there's an industry based around selling girls. And Ruth's story represents the front lines, really, the NPOs, the NGOs, law enforcement, who are trying to release these girls, repatriate them, deal with all of the fallout, the trauma, etc. So we created these 3 stories, but all the stories converge. Some of these characters are in the stories at certain points at the same time. So it offers a fully fleshed out account of a human trafficking story. Okay, then we need a publisher. Okay, so right from early on, we wanted to work with ABACs. We wanted to work with Alistair Graham Marr. And so we pursued them quite aggressively. There may have been a stalking incident in Dubai. There may have been a slightly hostage-taking situation in Shizuoka. But Alistair did agree to get on board with us. The only problem was, before we get to that slide, the problem was that Alistair wanted more stories. 3 stories does not a series make, he said. He said, chop, chop, go out, find more stories. So we talked to a lot of people and looked at a lot of issues. And we talked to a lot of teachers who are big proponents of global issues in the classroom. And we kind of narrowed these root things down to these 6 topics. And all of the issues we look at can be traced back to these, and they almost never only one. None of them happen in a vacuum. It's always comorbidity. We looked at the Sustainable Development Goals and how we could find stories that included these roots and supported the Sustainable Development Goals. Because also more and more teachers are teaching courses about these days as well. So that brought us to our second book that we did, which is mine. This is a story about child exploitation, cobalt mining in the Congo. And again, it's written with the three strand perspectives. We've got a boy who has to work in the mine. We have the chief of a village who is, she's kind of overcome with grief that she allowed the mine to come near the village, that she thought it would be a good thing for the village. And the third story is the village, which is where the village as a community takes steps to improve their lot. So
Trina, did you have any problems or opposition to the idea of bringing up these issues?
Oh, yeah, we did actually. It was the parsnips problem. So kind of everybody we spoke to, and we're at JALT conferences talking to everybody about this, and everyone says, you can't do these stories, parsnips, can't do these stories. And I think in general, we just kind of ignored it and hoped for the best. And fair enough, I'm not a publisher, right? But I do appreciate that if schools won't buy the books on these topics, then we're all in trouble, really. But later, working for X Reading with Paul Goldberg, I read hundreds of graded readers, loads of them, and everyone is always talking about the classics. Students love the classics, teachers love the classics, everybody wants the classics. But much later, what struck me is in the classics, there's loads of parsnips violations throughout the classics. Not the younger level ones, not the Heidi and the Little Princess and stuff like that, but A Tale of Two Cities, A Jury of Her Peers, Tess of the D'Urbervilles. I mean, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, the entire story is predicated on her rape. Spoiler alert, sorry, Tess gets raped and the whole story is what happens after that. But so I don't have anything succinct to wrap this slide up, but I think it's worth thinking about that actually all these topics are kind of all out there in what people consider to be an acceptable package. Is it me still, Matt?
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, maybe over to me now.
Yeah.
Sorry, my video it seems to be working better with my video off, so you'll just have to see my profile picture there. Well, I was actually interested in writing a story along these lines as in Indigenous lines, because of more of a back scratch thing to do. But being Māori myself and from New Zealand, I wanted to share some light on some of the struggles in facing Indigenous in the world, mainly through a Māori story, which I'm connected to, having Māori roots myself. This is my family. My great grandmother was Māori, and she married an Irish immigrant. And then my grandma, well, I suppose if we're going to put fractions on it, my grandmother's half Māori, my father a quarter, me and my 4 brothers an eighth, and my daughter Mahana, she's half Japanese and a 16th Māori. by the way, her name's Mahana, which means warm in Māori. She just came in before, but with the virtual background on, couldn't see her. So I was actually born down in the very south of New Zealand, but my Māori roots, my two iwi, my two tribes are from up here in Taranaki. So I was very far away from my roots, and I didn't get to learn much about my Māori side while I was growing up. My father couldn't speak the language, and he didn't know much about the culture either, which we will talk about a little bit later about why that came about. This is my primary school. So in my primary school, there's only two Māori boys, myself, very cute, aren't I? And Leonard, a Māori girl, Leoma, and she was my first girlfriend, by the way. She dumped me after 2 weeks only because I didn't say goodbye to her after school one day. Anyway, back to the subject. So there wasn't much Māori language or culture taught in our school as well, because there aren't many Māori living down south of Japan. Well, there weren't at the time. I don't want to really give a whole history lesson, but I think we need to understand a little bit of history of New Zealand about why this issue has come about, and why I wanted to write about it. We all know Captain Cook discovered New Zealand in 1769. This is what the textbooks tell us, but actually no, that's wrong. They found out later that Abel Tasman came in 1642, so they changed the textbooks. And then actually only just recently, with our wonderful Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, she started pushing for the real history to be taught in New Zealand schools. The Māori came to New Zealand in the 13th century. And Māori didn't discover New Zealand by accident. Actually, Polynesians were traveling around this triangle for over 1,000 years. Māori came to New Zealand on purpose and came to live there. So in pre-contact times, everything was hunky-dory, living very peacefully. Well, actually, Māori lived in iwi, which are tribal groups, and which were peaceful with some groups and not so much with other iwi. A lot of conflicts going on depending on different things, ownership of certain things, wanting land, resources, etc. And maybe some squabbles that happened along the way. But actually, when the European came, they said, "Oh, we have to help the Māori people because they are so unhealthy and uncouth." But their life expectancy at the time was the same as Europeans, so it wasn't really a health issue that was going on there. So then European visitors came in 17th century with trade, a lot of trading. Whaling and sealing happened. The missionaries came. Let's save these Māori barbarians and introduce Christianity. We also introduced a lot of new diseases that Māori had never had contact with, like influenza and the measles. So that wiped out a lot of the Māori population. Then in the 1800s, more settlers came, which kind of like started unbalancing the power a little bit. Up until then, trade and whaling and sealing and all the language was done in the Māori language. But these settlers needed cheap land, and there's like a lot of squabbles over ownership, the ideas of ownership, whether you can actually own land or not. In Māori belief, it's kind of more of a belonging to the land rather than an ownership of land. Price disagreements, and from there came war. So war started, but the English couldn't win because Māori were had a very long warring history and were very adept at warring. That would be a whole kind of presentation on itself. But so the settler government decided to make a treaty called the Treaty of Waitangi, which was signed by the English government and some of the Māori chiefs. And at this time, it's good to know, it's probably important to know that there was actually, at the time, there's only 2,000 settlers in New Zealand, and there was about 100,000 Māori population. So the power was still with Māori at the time. There's a couple of key points with the treaty, that the Māori would sell their land to British for an agreed price. which afterwards the government reneged on, but we'll go into that a little bit later. And that the Queen has sovereignty over New Zealand, but Maori chiefs can retain their own resources. Now, the problem was that there were two versions. It was first written in Māori, and there was two words called kawanatanga and rangatiratanga, which means sovereignty and governorship. Now, they were interpreted differently in the English version. So there was big problems there about what actually happens. And then also from 1840 to 1850, about another 90,000 immigrants came to New Zealand. So by 1850, the populations were equal. So the power status started to change. There was a lot of reneging done on the treaty. The Māori were very unhappy with that, and that then happened the Māori land wars, the 1840s to the 1860s. Māori lost the land wars and became in control of the British. Now the the settler government said, okay, if your tribe, if your iwi fought with us in the Māori land wars, we're going to take all your land. And they decided to confiscate all the land of any tribe that fought against them. So if we're looking just over these 80 years, this is how much land has been lost from 1860 to 1939. And of course, losing all this land had a huge effect. The Māori who lived out in the rural places had to urbanize, come in to find work. They became homeless, had no homes. And it was from this point that the New Zealand government started changed its policy from kind of assimilation to integration as the two populations started to mix more in an urban context. So land loss, starting all from land loss, we get all of these other losses that are appearing with it. We get language loss as English, as everyone starts turning to English as the main mode of communication. With the language loss, there's knowledge loss, culture loss, economic loss, political loss, social construction as Māori had to adhere to the European social construction, way of life as well, spiritual loss with Christianity coming in, starting to take over instead of the Māori religious beliefs, and of course a pride loss. So this all kind of boils down to an identity loss. So who are we in a kind of a quote unquote type phrase would be, we are just like brown Europeans. So we don't know our language, we don't know our culture, but we are brown and treated differently and discriminated against. So then we're getting a little bit into the modern days. We have with colonization effects, there's discrimination. Of course, with poverty, we see physical health problems, mental health problems, addiction to alcohol first, smoking, which goes to physical problems, and then of course drugs later, crime and gangs, protests, and a lot of treaty claims against the treaty. Now, actually, if Māori took this treaty to an international court, the indigenous language always holds true. But both parties have to go to court. So the government didn't want to go to court, so it's never been taken to the international court. So this is a story that I really wanted our readers to know. So yeah.
And what are the stories about for your identity series, Matt?
Okay, well, identity is follows three main characters who have been affected somehow by the history and what I've just talked about. We have Tama here, who is a story of a young boy who wants to know more about his Māori roots but knows nothing about it. And this is actually, if you get to read the story, it's actually loosely based on my father's story up to a point, up to when Tama starts learning kapahaka Māori performance. Up until then, it's pretty much my father's story. And then we also have Kylie, who finds out a shocking secret within her family. And then we have Hone in the third story, Pride, who's thinking about becoming a school teacher, but he's Māori and doesn't know if doesn't know any Māori school teachers and doesn't know if he'll be able to do it. And of course, as before, all of these stories converge into what I'd like to think is a happy ending. So these are the 3 stories that we have at the moment: Trafficked, Identity, and Mine. Coming soon, in the process of writing, is Sherpas and Plastics. And yes, we can find these books at the moment up on ABAX Digital. They're up there. Maybe Alistair, you might want to jump in and give a link or something, and some login information in the chat there would be great if you want to do that.
I actually just sent privately to Marcel. Sorry, try that again. Yeah, if you go to ABAX Digital.
That would be great. Yep. And also soon we will be getting them up on X Reading. Paul's being gracious enough to let us throw them up there at some stage.
I also need to explain a couple of things if I can jump in. You'll need a password, which is that one, 95 abex_teacher.kl. And then each book has its own book code as well. So the password will get you into the site. The book code for Identity is Tipuna. Am I pronouncing that right, Matt?
That's right. Yes, very good.
And then for Mine, it's Cobalt. And for a Trafficked, it's Sabina. So those are the book codes, and you'll be able to read those for free online for a short time. We ask that you don't give those to students just yet, or maybe if you do, it'll just be for a limited time. And then as Matt says, it'll be on the X Reading site by next week. So thank you. If you have questions, just send me a question privately in the chat. As for audio will be available, but not at the moment.
Okay.
Thanks,
And
Al.
All right, Matt and Katrina, you have your 2-minute warning.
Okay, so we do need stories, people. Ignore everything I said about birthing cows. It's wonderful. It's been a joyous experience from start to finish. We need stories. So if you're out there with a passion and you can write stories, please contact us.
okay, I think that's about it. We're going to do question and answer at the end, aren't we? I think so. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't have my video on, and there's those hiccups at the start there. Let me stop sharing. And
I would also call on the writers. Please, we do need more stories.
Cheers, Al. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, wonderful. I think we all learned a lot from that, and I want to echo, if you have a story to tell, even seems a little bit controversial, don't forget, JoJo's story not only won an award, but is very popular with the students as well, so we should remember that. All right, thank you, Matt and Katrina, that was wonderful, and I think we all enjoyed that talk, but we got one more. Thank you very much, but now let's hear from Shamsi and Sherry. So are you guys ready to go?
Yes, and I will go first.
Okay.
And Shamsi will follow after me.
All
so
right.
Just give me a moment while I share my screen.
Sure, no problem. When you're ready, just let me know and I'll start the timer.
Okay. So I just, yes, you can start the timer now. Group.
Okay, thank you.
So first of all, kia ora, Matt, thank you for your talk, and Katrina also, which dovetails really nicely with what I'm about to say in terms of identity and stories, both of those things. So I would like to just give a little bit of background as to what's going to happen. So I'm going to talk a little about the project called Stories About Ourselves. And when I've finished speaking, my co-presenter Shamsi is going to talk a little about the impact of the story project on her. And she's also going to give us some feedback from people in Bangladesh who have been using the stories that we've created. So I've entitled this 3 Birds, 1 Stone because we've covered actually 3 different aspects of involvement in this project that we have undertaken. One was teacher development, and one was materials development, and involvement in stories and language development and across nations, so international involvement. And the pictures you can see here on the left is the original writing group that formed, and of course my own university. So I'm going to give you some background and talk about how the project got started, what our original goals were, how they shifted along the way, some of the outcomes, and some of the insights that I have learned from the involvement in the project. So the project was motivated when I visited Kathmandu in 2017 to attend the NELTA conference. And I went to a workshop by two Bangladeshi academics, and they were describing their research into their learners' preferences for reading material. They were most concerned that their students had a fairly low level of English. They weren't particularly motivated to study hard. They didn't participate well in class, but more importantly, what I picked up was that they really struggled to try and learn the language at the same time as dealing with the cultural content of the reading material that they were given to read. And often the reading was made more difficult for them because they just couldn't understand some of the cultural material within their reading texts. Another motivation came from my involvement with THT in Bangladesh, when I spoke with teachers there who talked a little about their own lack of confidence in their own English skills and their lack of opportunity to develop professionally. Of course, within Bangladesh, teachers have a lot of workshops and opportunities within their own country, but they don't often have the opportunities for professional development beyond that. Of course, COVID-19 has changed that a little with our involvement in online conferences. So that's a little bit of the background to what motivated me to start the project Stories About Ourselves. And so I decided that perhaps I could do something about this lack of culturally relevant material by setting up a workshop at one of the THT events in Dhaka and inviting interested teachers to take part and show them how they could turn stories that they had written into graded reading materials. And so we began in 2018 actually with a workshop for 3 hours during the THT conference. And you can see the people here who took part. I think we had 8 or perhaps 9 people who took part in that first workshop. And I showed them a little bit about how to grade reading material. And I talked about my interest in having them develop stories that they had written themselves for their own learners. So my original goals were to encourage teachers to write their own stories and use them as language resources, teaching resources, reading texts within their classrooms. But they needed to know how to grade those stories so that what they had written was appropriate for their learners. At the same time, I was really hoping to establish a committed group of writers. I had no idea how committed the writers would be, whether they would be willing to take part in an ongoing project or not. So I just put the idea out there and asked, and I was really pleased to find that all of those people were very keen and have written stories since. Of course, it's a little bit challenging because my workplace is here in Japan and the people I'm working with are in Bangladesh. And so as they have been writing, I've been trying to mentor and give them support from here. And then our original goal was to have our own website and make the stories available across Bangladesh for teachers to use for free. And then once we had that up and running, to of course expand the range of stories and of course maintain the Bangladeshi content focus of each of those stories. And this is where what Matt was saying ties in nicely with our project, because I felt that stories and language in particular is a way of our expressing our identity. And with Bangladeshi learners, if they're reading materials, commercial materials from outside their own cultural setting, they don't often get the chance to see themselves in the material that they are reading. And that concerned me to some extent. And if language is identity, I asked myself, what would my students be thinking about learning English? Would they be asking questions like this? Who am I when I'm using English? And who do I want to be when I'm using English? And what actually is my identity when I'm speaking English? And in most cases, if I ask people that question, they say, well, I'm Bangladeshi, but I'm using English. They're not seeing themselves as necessarily wanting to integrate into native speaker communities. Yes, perhaps if they're going to study or do international business, but many of our students in Bangladesh are going to stay in Bangladesh and they're going to be using English with other non-native speakers. And then how did these questions relate to stories? Well, stories are the means by which we construct our identity. So the stories that we tell help us to understand who we are. And stories are not just things that we use when we're children, but we continue through our lives, and our stories change and they reflect who we are, our experiences, our culture, our relationships, and so on. And the stories that we tell and the stories that we read communicate something about who we are, and they also help us to understand who we are. So as the project has continued, the initial workshop collaboration has evolved into a long-term project with 3 clear areas of focus. So we now have a bank of free, culturally appropriate graded reading materials for English learners to use. And that goal very much has stayed in place. And my goal to train teachers to develop these themselves, this is also an ongoing goal, but I actually underestimated how long this might take. And I think this is going to continue to be a very long-term goal. And the third one, to strengthen professional ties and friendships between English teachers, academics, and other people, because some of our writers are not actually teachers. Some are children, one man is an engineer, and we are trying to build friendships. And initially, I just assumed that this would happen, but now it's a very important thing for me personally. And I feel that we have developed strong friendships between myself and the writers, but also the writers with each other. We have our own Facebook group page that we communicate through, and we do communicate a lot with each other. So some of the outcomes to date, we now have a live website which you can access from 2 different points. So this is the actual URL for Stories About Ourselves. So you can go directly to the website and you'll see the homepage, which looks like this. Or you can go through a live portal on the Belter website. And at this point, I want to say a huge thank you to the Belter organisation who have sponsored the website and made it possible for us to use their website and their website manager in order to publish our stories. So this is the homepage of the Belter website, and I just happened to get, you know, how the pictures shift, but I just happened to get an image of Pat Doherty, who's my boss, and the THT crew last year at Belter. At the THT workshops in Dakar. So if you go to the Belter website and you go to the Stories About Ourselves and click on the green button there, you can also find our stories. And on the page, the homepage on the left, you'll see images that go with each of the stories, and you'll see what levels they're at. And on the right-hand side, you can see an example of one of our stories. And at this point, I'd like to say that our stories can be used for extensive reading purposes, so people can just read them and enjoy them. However, if teachers wish to use them for more intensive reading study, they can do that as well. So you'll notice that in the text, the high frequency vocabulary is highlighted so that students notice it. And then at the end of the story, there'll be lists of those words along with questions and other activities. And as well as this, on our site, we have an information page that tells the story of stories about ourselves. We have a page with writing guidelines, and we have contact details. And sometimes people contact me with a story saying, can I please have a story of mine put up on your website? And so far, I've been able to accept everything that's been sent to me. So the process involves just beginning with anything, a story, a poem, a non-fiction piece, as long as it's written by a Bangladeshi writer and it's original. And I edit and analyze it using vocab profile, LexTutor, and also published guidelines for grammar. I decide on a level and adapt the text to match that, create lists and highlight the vocabulary within the text. And then my writers will send me photos or images, paintings, drawings, and I will add follow-up activities. And then we will also have a special site or special place within our site for writers to be profiled. And here we have a picture of Shamsi's profile. Shamsi's going to speak to you in just a moment. And you can see on the left a list of the people who have contributed thus far. Feedback so far has been very positive. People from rural areas and cities are using the material. A number of universities have contacted me to say that they are also using the materials in their reading classes. And the teachers are giving very positive feedback about their students' responses as well. And the teachers who have been involved in the project have commented positively to me too about how their involvement has developed their professional skills. They've got more knowledge about what's involved in teaching vocabulary, for example, or the importance of extensive reading, for example. And their own confidence in their language skills also has grown. And of course, because they are the writers, they keep telling me, we should do this on our site, or we should do that. So we are taking all of those suggestions on board and improving our site as well. Some of the insights I've gained from this, well, projects evolve in an organic way. In many cases, you just have to let a project go the way it wants to go. Commitment is important. Building trust and personal relationships was and still is a big priority. Being patient, collaborating at a distance is challenging. The need to expand the writing project community, and this is continuing. And expanding our online presence, not just through our website, but through social media has been important. But I have to say, having the website was really a turning point in terms of the enthusiasm and the interest that was expressed by people involved in the project. It really made a big difference. And there's a few references there from me, if you're interested, and a few scenes from Bangladesh. So that's really all I wish to say. And I'd like to hand over to Shamsi now to talk about what she has prepared.
Thank you, Sherry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Can I share my screen now?
Go ahead.
Can you see my screen?
We can now, yes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shamsi Huda. I work at the Daffodil International University in Bangladesh. And good afternoon to you all from Bangladesh. The project Sherry has introduced to you, I would love to talk as one of the participants of that project. At the very outset, I would like to share the points that I am going to talk about. My experience as a material developer, our I to we journey, reflections from my students and some of my colleagues, and scopes for individualization. In sharing my experience as a writer, at the beginning, I would like to share with you an anecdote. Just after 2 weeks of my admission into the University of Dhaka, I was asked to fill out a research questionnaire. And in that questionnaire, I was asked, why did I consider English department to enroll myself? And I still remember that I wrote, I love to read short stories a lot. And if I admit myself into this department, I'll be able to develop myself as a short story writer. However, in the course of time, I forgot that. I just forgot that. And after my graduation, I became an ELT professional. And much after that, after a long time, in 2018, I met Professor Sherry Brown in one of the writing workshops of Belta THT event. And eventually, I became a material developer after 20 years, after almost 20 years. So, but it was not an easy task. It was not something that I became overnight. Without Professor Brown's passionate efforts and dedication, I would not be able to become a material developer. She has taught me how to use LexTutor. This is a vocabulary analysis tool, and this is useful for analyzing academic word lists. And I have used it to develop the materials for my stories. I knew about Bloom's taxonomy earlier, but it is Professor Brown again who taught me how to utilize Bloom's taxonomy in creating higher order thinking skills questions. And I am indebted to Professor Sherry Brown for her efforts, for her dedication. And of course, I'm indebted to THT, a SIG of JALT, and Belta, Bangladesh English Language Teachers Association. Without Belta's support, we would not be able to publish our works, and we would not be able to tangible. Now, they have created this moment of dream come true moment for me, and I was very happy. The second point on which I would like to focus, that is the most beautiful thing of our project. That is our I to we journey. And even here, Professor Brown was the pioneer. One day, Professor Brown has sent me an email, and she found a poem of this little girl on my Facebook wall. And she emailed me and asked me whether we could ask this little girl to contribute to our project, because Professor Brown has found some cultural elements in her poems. And I asked the little girl, and she happily agreed to contribute to our project. And she contributed 4 poems for us. Her name is Soyod Ariana Hussain. She is 9 years old, and she is my daughter. And this gesture of Professor Brown has given me an idea that why not engaging my own students? I started approaching my students, whether they are interested in contributing to our project or not. And at first I got Lutfun Nahar Mahmoud Oishorjo, my student, and she sent me a poem titled Window View. And then I got my another student, Rajan Mahmood, and he is a teacher at a secondary school outside Dhaka, and he is also a Belta member, and he is very innovative as a teacher. And he has sent me another writing, a very poignant story entitled A Forgotten Photograph. So here are their contributions. And with all of these writings, there are activities based on Bloom's taxonomy, and all the skills are integrated: listening, writing, reading, and speaking. Now, let's talk about my writings. In the very beginning, we were 8 members in our workshop. Sherry has already shared with you the photograph. And I'm very glad to say that I was the first one to come up with a story. And I'm very happy to share this also, that I have in total 3 fictions: Bochi, Pencil Hills, and A Sudden Discomfort, and 3 poems: A Storied Evening, Sweetheart, and Pride, in stories about ourselves. When our project became tangible, when everybody could see it, I started getting messages from my friends and colleagues. And one message I would like to share with you that is very special for me, that is from one of my friends who stays in New Zealand, who used to be a student of anthropology. And she wrote me after 8 years reading my story. That was really very touchy for me. And that story is Bochi. You can see that this painting is also made by my student Lutfun Nahar Mahmoud Oishorju, who is also a writer. So I would like to read out the comment of my friend from New Zealand. I just couldn't remember how to play Bochi. Your story reminded me all the details. You have revived a popular sport of our time for the new generation. It's a shame that these types of sports are getting lost nowadays. The story took me back to my childhood days. This is the comment of my friend from New Zealand. So she wrote that I have revived our old sport of our time, that is Bochi, and that required wide green fields to play that children of our time cannot have the opportunity. And the next comment is from one of my colleagues, Miss Umme Kulsum. She is an adult ESL instructor in Toronto, and she has given me this comment, the second comment. The story took me back to my childhood days. We also used to play Bochi a lot. And I remember we used to make a sound while running and holding breath, like chee or something like that. Very entertaining story indeed. I have also tried my stories in my classroom. I have tried my story, A Sudden Discomfort, in one of my classes of reading skills. This story is about 2 friends, one friend staying abroad and another friend is staying in Bangladesh. And the friend who is staying abroad asked the friend in Bangladesh to do her wedding shopping. In Bangladesh, wedding is very important and wedding shopping is very important. And only the people who are very close to us, we can entrust them to do our wedding shopping. The story is about that. And there was an interesting twist at the end of the story. So after reading the story, I found some of my male students curious to know about the names of different kinds of wedding jewelries, as if they are going to marry them. And the female students were very, very excited, and they were in competition with each other for sharing their own experiences of shopping for a near one who stays abroad. I have collected feedback on the same story from one of my colleagues, Muhammad Mustafizur Rahman, who works as an assistant professor in Daffodil International University. He wrote to me, I have enjoyed the story very much. I think the students will also be able to relate themselves with the story, as the time, place, and incidents of the story are very much familiar with their real life experiences. We all have more or less gone through all these beautiful as well as tricky moments of life. The tasks are mostly related to vocabulary learning, enhancing reading comprehension, and improving speaking skills. So I really think that in the language classes, especially in speaking skill development classes, this story will definitely trigger more responses from our students. My next story is Pencil Hills. And this is the story on which I have received many feedback. And this is a story of a teenage girl who was obsessed for a pair of pencil heels, sorry. And this story moves around that girl. Her name is Himi, and her family situation. Her mother is a widow, and there is an excellent twist at the end of the story. And there was a development of Himi also as a person from the beginning to the end. And I have got a feedback from one of my colleagues, Ms. Tasina Yasmin, who is an associate professor of Department of English at DIU. She has found out some potentials of this story, and she has written to me, I thoroughly enjoyed reading the short story Pencil Hills. As an educator, I found the story perfectly suitable for practicing reading skills for tertiary level students. The focus on different categories of vocabulary development makes this a very focused task. I also like how the cultural references make it unique for our Bangladeshi students. The questions were focused on all levels of Bloom's taxonomy, and that, I believe, helps hone the critical thinking skills of our students. You can see that how extensive reading materials can be turned into different kinds of materials, and by individualization, there are scopes for multimodal approaches. So it is up to the teachers how they are going to use it. They can use it in many ways. It is very important to motivate our students and decide the approaches accordingly. Last of all, I would like to conclude by saying teachers are agents of change. It is possible to materialize many positive changes if teachers' agency is at work. We do not know. In Bangladesh also, in tertiary level of education, extensive reading can be included in the English language teaching curriculum of higher education as well. We do not know. Thank you so much. Thank you for your patient hearing.
All right, that was wonderful too. Oh, thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Shamshi. It was so great to hear from both of you. Now, actually, I'd like to ask everyone to unmute themselves so that we can give a warm round of applause to all of our panel and thank them for their wonderful talks. And if you don't unmute, put your clap emoji on there too. All right, well, we are going to segue into the question and answer section now, but I also want to remind everyone that we will have a short break between the forum and the general meeting. The general meeting will start around 6:30 or so. So we've got a couple of questions, and we'll give these to the panel. But after the questions and answers, we'll go into the break time. So don't go far. Use your break. I'll use my break time. I'm going to refresh my tea and refresh myself for just a moment. But then we'll go into breakout rooms. Mark will put us into some breakout rooms where we can discuss things and maybe get some information. If you want to change your room, you can do so. You're not beholden, you're not stuck in one group. If you don't like the shape of my face, for example, you can jet out, and I don't blame you. Well, anyway, so let's ask some questions now. I've got a few, and one for the whole group is an interesting one. How much time did the writers take to complete a book after you've done your background information? And that is for the whole panel, if anyone wants to answer that question. Anyone can answer.
Do you mean like from very start to finish? I think Trina should jump in here, but from the
well, why don't we ask?
side,
Yeah, okay, that great. Trina, could you maybe talk about your experiences from soup to nuts, maybe?
Soup to nuts. Okay. Well, with the trafficked book, you know, like we had such a mojo for it. It actually, the stories came together really quite quickly. And later we learned a lot more about the process and we made changes. So, you know, it was quite a while before the final was there. But the initial stories we could pull together very quickly. With the second book, it took a lot longer. I mean, the big problem is always working around schedules, you know, you know, you've got to try to hope that everybody's got the mojo at the same time to be working on it. So I would say that my experience is they've gone slower than I would have liked. I just don't have as much time to do it as I would like to have to do it. And I don't think anybody else does either.
I would just add that the sticking point always seemed to be at the point of storyboarding, because in our case, we're doing the triple narrative. And so we'd always get people saying, hey, I want to write. Great. What do you want to write about? This. Great. And Trina and I and Anne might discuss it. And then Trina works with the writer to get a storyboard. And that's when crickets.
Right.
Probably in my experience, I've never written a narrative before. So it took me a long time, a lot of back and forth with Trina and Anne with editing. And I knew I had a story and what I wanted to write it, but it's just like, as we were saying before, probably the writer needs to think more like a reader. I had a lot of kind of narrative text, and Trina and Anne were saying, hey, this would be much better in dialogue. You've got to write all this in dialogue. So I had to go back to the start and write it in dialogue. So yeah, for me, it took a really long time, but it was a wonderful process and very happy with the product.
This was my question. And all I'm hearing now is it took a long time. It took longer than we expected. I was kind of hoping more for at least, you know, a time frame. Did it take 6 months? Did it take a year?
Over a year. Years.
For one book?
Yeah.
Okay, and following that one is this question for Trina and Matt. He would like to know more about the process of writing. For example, do you submit your book chapter by chapter? And he asks, what support do you get from the publisher?
Okay, so well, you know, when Matt came on board with us, you know, we just talked to Matt and said, you know, how do you want to do it? You know, like we could be flexible and work, because writers work in different ways. You know, some people are very private about their work. They don't want to share it till they think it's done. Some people want edits done along the way. So we just talked to Matt about what he wanted. And I think you submitted stories, like a story at a time, didn't you, Matt?
I did, yeah. I started with Tama because that was kind of like my dad's story and I had it in my head and I just went for it. And I think you and Anne were like kind of editing that as I started on the next
one. Yeah. You know, and then it's not really until we can see all three of them together, because I mean, the whole process, it's the intertwining that is really important, and making that happen in a really authentic way as well. So, you know, we've just kind of like got the building blocks of the story, and then we put the three together and look at, you know, what we could do here is we could have maybe have this happen, maybe have this happen. Yeah, we need all of them in the end to make it work the way we want it to work. But we think that we've speeded up the process. We've learned a lot. We're getting faster. Gonna get these out by Christmas. Okay, Al?
All right, that sounds very good. Okay, well, we are running close up to the end of time for Q&A. So let's give our panel a great thanks again. A nice round of applause again. Thank you very much. And I think we can now go into our segue for a small break before we can go into our AGM. Mark, is that okay?